Should you keep the factory PCM or should you dial up an aftermarket one? Tonight, we're going to talk about that. That's the points of tonight. Look at that whiteboard. Don't look too close at it because I kind of just stubbed some 2x4s against the wall so that I could hang it up. Like, this isn't the forever setup, so don't worry. We're going to get a background behind it. The other thing I do have to apologize for, some of my astute viewers are going to notice there is kind of a line rolling right about here. I was hopeful. I hadn't noticed this before, but now I do. I don't know if it's on that end or this end. The frequency of the LED lights I have in here, that's what's causing this line. So I apologize for you if it's too much for you to watch. I understand, but hopefully I'll have better lights next time we're out here with this with the good camera, so that we don't have that. Unfortunately, there's no setting I can change to get rid of it, but I just want to throw that out there before people were commenting on it. So tonight we're talking about stock PCM, the capabilities of them, whether you should keep it. All right, just a second. I gotta stuff my microphone in my pocket here, or I'm gonna keep catching it. Or if you should switch over to some sort of aftermarket PCM. Now, funny enough, this was not the aftermarket PCM I was looking for, and I forgot that I had it. So this is an old AEM setup. Probably still work on something. I actually do have the harness for it and everything for a neon. So I don't know. Maybe someday I'll tinker with it for fun. But we're gonna back up slightly, and we're gonna kind of describe what a PCM does and kind of build off there, because some of you might not really realize why this actually matters, why a stock PCM versus an aftermarket, or like a flashed PCM or a tuned PCM. So we're gonna kind of back it up a little bit, and we're gonna talk about what a PCM does, okay? Also, to all my people who are watching the Gateway Derby Nationals, I did move my little TV in here, so I did have it on the background so I can watch caution after caution after caution after caution, because holy, they're tearing everything up. But a 27-inch TV on the other end of a 40-foot pole barn, can't see it that well. So yeah, just got me a full MS2 with a kinetic racing harness. Nice, nice. All right. So PCM serves one very basic function, but it's very, very important, and it's kind of complicated. The basic function of a PCM is it takes inputs into the PCM, and it turns them into outputs. Again, I have the handwriting of a small child, so you'll have to deal with that as well too, okay? That is the most basic way to describe a PCM. It takes inputs and it turns them into outputs, okay? Your inputs can include things like the crank sensor, the cam sensor, your throttle sensor, coolant sensor, air sensor, your air intake sensor. Let's see what else we might have on a modern PCM. Sensor, crank sensor, cam sensor. So this is just the engine things, okay? Because you will have things like your speedometer, emission stuff, things like that. We're mostly concerned with the things that make your engine want to run, okay? You're also going to have a either a map sensor or a I can't read her right. You're going to have a map sensor or a MAF sensor. So manifold absolute pressure, or mass airflow, okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Cam, crank, throttle, coolant, air, there. Your either your air intake or your mass will actually typically include a barometer. Okay. These are pretty much the basic intakes or basic inputs that your car is going to need to run. Okay. You might have one or two more. You might have one or two less. You can change some of these depending on what you do, but this is mainly what you have. Okay. Your outputs. You're going to have your injectors. You are going to have your spark slash coil slash coils. Okay. You're going to have your idle. You're going to have your that's mainly it. So you also have voltage as an input, and oftentimes you'll have an alternator output. This is variable timing. As a possibility. Okay. Not all of them have that. Some of them do, some of them don't, right? I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Variable timing could be like a variable intake runner, could be variable camshafts, things like that. Okay. But this is at its bare bones what your PCM does. Okay. Is it takes these and it converts them into these, right? Now it's going to need some information to be able to do that. It's your PCM's pretty dumb, to be honest with you. It really is. If this PCM is from a 95 Dodge Neon, okay, you can tell because it's one plug, right? There's more computing power in here than sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. However, this is roughly the equivalent of like a 286 computer from like, you know, the mid to late 80s, right? It's really dumb compared to newer modern computers. Because basically what this PCM is going to do is it is going to know that you have, you know, it technically doesn't even know this, right? It knows it has tables inside of here. Now there is a whole bunch of tables, but the majority of them just look something a little bit like this. And for your fuel, it is going to have something that's basically RPM and map, okay, or math, okay. And then the output is going to be these little boxes in here, and it's going to know how much fuel and how to put into the motor based on where you're at in these zones. So if you are high vacuum, which would be like throttle closed, but you're low RPM, then you're down here, you don't need any fuel. You need just barely any fuel to be able to just enough to idle, essentially, okay? Because that's all you're doing. Your idle's down here, wide open throttle's up here, right? Your rev limiter's up here. Now, if you're effectively zero manifold pressure, like if you're in you have no vacuum and you're at high RPMs, that means you're essentially wide open throttle all the way up here, high RPM. You need all the fuel, okay? And then there's a bunch of transient situations where you might be mid RPM and high vacuum. Well, that's because you're going into the corner right before you hit the throttle where you're lifted. So, that's what it does, is it just looks up in this table and it says, okay, this map, this vacuum compared to this RPM means I need this much fuel, right? And it just outputs the injector pulse. Same thing with the ignition. Your table like this, you know, it might have throttle position and RPM, or it might be map. I'm not going to sit here and tell you exactly what every map says, right? But all it's doing is it is taking these inputs with these tables, finding the spot, and then it tells it, I need X amount of fuel, X amount of spark, you know, might need idle, or, you know, RPM, all that kind of stuff, right? We can do a deeper dive, like master class kind of deal on tuning at some point. You know, I've got a bunch of tuners that I'm sure would happy to come on. We can share screens, really kind of delve into it. Now, I can tell you, as somebody who can tune these PCMs right here, there's about 35 maps that this has, okay? When your car is cold, like right now, Michigan, it's like 30 degrees out, right? Actually, apparently it's 40 degrees, my computer says, okay? So it's 40 degrees out. It's pretty cold, okay? Oh, Modified actually made it all the way out. Apparently I missed that because it was a replay, but yeah, it was riding a fence and just right out. That'll be a minute to fix. But when it's cold, you need more fuel, okay? It's like the old school days, like your lawnmower, like you got to pull the choke. It needs less air, more fuel, okay? And that's just a universal for engines. You just more fuel, less air, not by a lot, but a little bit. So my PCMs, even these aftermarket ones, okay, they have a table in there that is like a cold start enrichment, right? What that does is that table is going to look at temp, okay, and that's basically it. It's kind of a one-dimensional table, but basically the temp, well, actually, it would be opposite. Temp would be down here, and then up here would be the change percent. Okay, and what that means is, on say, we're going to just go 0 to 100. So over here is 100 degrees. Okay, we need 0 change. So we need right here what our map up here says is what we need. But at 0 degrees over here, you know, over here is 0. We might need 100% change, which means we're going to double the amount of fuel in there. And that map is actually going to go something about like that. Okay. But this computer is going to look at the coolant temp sensor, and it's going to go, holy crap, the motor's 0 degrees. I need to add 100% extra fuel. And all it's doing is it's taking this map up here, and it's just scaling the whole thing up. Okay. And once it gets warm enough, it'll scale it back down. Now, here's the fun part, and this is something to consider, especially you neon guys. If you do not have one of these inputs, except your crankshaft, that one is vitally important to everything. But say you don't have your coolant sensor, you don't have your air intake sensor, like one of those. What it does is it picks a default value for you, okay? So the OEMs are going to say, hey, if the coolant temp sensor goes bad, we still need people to be able to start their cars. So there's not going to be down here at 0. They're going to be somewhere here in the middle, because they'd rather it run a little bit rich to start and across the board than to not be able to start at all because it's a little bit too cold. So you might have anywhere from like a 40 to 60% increase in fuel. And that is what happens in the neons. If you unplug the coolant temp sensor, the only thing you're doing is you're adding a bunch of extra fuel, and you already don't need extra fuel in these PCMs. They run rich, okay? I can't say that across the board as to what all makes and models are going to do, whether you need them rich or lean. However, on a neon, that's what happens, okay? So if you're missing some of these less important sensors, they insert a default value, okay? So just something to keep in mind there, right? Now, things like your variable timing are going to be they're going to be temperature based, typically, because they don't want a cold motor likely with cold oil and that, they're probably not going to engage like VTEC, I think. I know some vehicles won't do that. So they're going to be RPM and temperature-based typically. Your idle is going to be like temperature-based. Your spark and your fuel is going to be temperature-based. You're also going to have things like, and the reason why a throttle position sensor could be important is back in the day with the carburetor, when you'd whack the throttle, they had things like accelerator pumps. What the accelerator pump would do, there was a mechanical piece on the carburetor. When you'd whack that throttle, it would squirt some extra fuel right down the hole. Because when you crack the throttle blades open and that huge rush of air comes in, you need all that extra, you need extra fuel to go with that to compensate for that wave of air coming in. Carburetors did it with an accelerator pump. Fuel injection does it with Excel enrichment. So there is a map somewhere in your PCM that has TPS, throttle position, and again, change percentage, okay? Now, the other fun part is that this is sort of a three-dimensional thing, because if I roll into it slowly, it doesn't need it, is if I just smack it, right? So this is also rate of change, okay? But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to say you're opening it fast, right? So the faster you open that, the bigger shot you need, okay? So that gets thrown on top of this. You might also have this thrown on top of that, okay? So there's more to this than just these very simple cam crank, spark, and fuel, okay? So the reason I wanted to talk about all that, okay? Oh, that's true too. Chris even said, and I completely forgot it, nobody brought it up, you have your O2 sensors, okay? The reason you have your O2 sensor is because your stock computer is going to try to be constantly aiming for a certain air-fuel ratio, okay? So if you're just cruising down the road, it wants to lean out or rich in the mixer to get the perfect burn, right? Now, Chris says, do you eliminate the O2 sensors? I eliminate the downstream one on a stock PCM because it just checks for catalytic converter efficiency. The upstream one, you can delete it, but you don't have to delete it, okay? Reason I say that is that your O2 sensors, okay? Everybody got this? Go ahead, take a screenshot of it real quick if you'd like. If you'd like to look at it a little later, if it's too much. I'm going to erase some of this so that we can talk about O2 sensors just for a second, okay? We're going to go ahead and delete these. I forgot to grab something to wipe it off with, so we are using our sweatshirt. Also, I was given this whiteboard by Earl. Appreciate that. But it does have, I doubt it can show up on, but it does have a big wrinkle right here. But I'm appreciative of a big free whiteboard, okay? So your O2 sensor in a factory setting is a narrow band sensor. You might have a wide band sensor depending on the car, but it's not that likely because they're expensive. Most OEMs don't use them. A narrow band sensor, you have rich and you have lean, okay? I can't spell either, right? And your narrow band O2 sensor, it's trying to read right here, but it can't tell you if you're really rich or you're really lean. It only knows rich or lean. So your sensor looks something like this, okay? And basically what the computer is trying to do is it is trying to get it to go rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean a certain amount of times per second, okay? That way it knows that it's just right there, you know, so it's trying to get it to do that, right? It doesn't know if it's, and this is where long-term and short-term or long-term and short-term fuel enrichment comes from, okay? And the idea is if this doesn't go lean and it just stays rich, stays rich, stays rich, it's going to start pulling fuel out, pulling fuel out, pulling fuel out until it starts switching. And it might do that for a short while, but then it'll try to get it back to where it's supposed to be. And if it stops Like if it lets it go back and it keeps switching, it'll do it. But if it doesn't, if it keeps having to take fuel and take fuel and take fuel and take fuel, it'll show up as your long-term fuel, and it's actually just changing like the map a little bit. Okay. Now it's not smart enough to rewrite the map. The map is there. It's just saying, hey, if this isn't switching fast enough, add X or subtract Y percentage. That's all it's doing. Okay. However, this switching happens X amount of times per second. Your O2 sensor can only do that so many times per second. It has a rate as to which it can do that. When you go wide open throttle, your computer knows it cannot do this quick enough. So what it does is it goes, all right, ignore this, just look at this. Now it might keep your temp sensor enrichments, it's going to keep your acceleration enrichments, stuff like that, but it ignores your O2 sensor, at least on a neon. Okay, it does that because that can't switch fast enough. So on a neon, on a race car, you can eliminate the O2 sensor because it will put a value in for the O2 sensor and it'll just roll. Okay, it will not lean it out, it will not richen it up, it just stays steady. Okay, it just refers to the map. But it runs exactly like it's supposed to at wide open throttle. It runs exactly the same as it would because it doesn't know that the O2 sensor isn't there because it ignores it anyway. So you can run it wide open throttle and it runs exactly the same as it would with or without an O2 sensor. Now, my philosophy has always been, why not run one? Because when I'm cruising around at pace speeds, when I'm idling into pits, things like that, on a stock PCM, okay, I would run an O2 sensor if I had one. The exhaust manifold I ran often had one. The header I ran didn't always have one. So if I had one that'd plug in, I'd run one. But I didn't worry about it otherwise. Okay. Now, the other O2 sensor, some stock PCMs use this. Aftermarket wideband O2 sensors or air fuel ratio gauges all use what's called a wideband sensor. Okay. And a wideband sensor actually can measure the air fuel ratio. Okay. So it doesn't switch like that. It actually says what it is. Okay. So it's not binary where it just goes up, down, up, down. It can actually say, you know, running rich, say this is a 10.0 ratio and this is a 20.0 ratio. And we want to be somewhere right here in the middle, which is roughly, stoichiometrics is 14.7, but we're going to say it's 15 for argument's sake. Okay. So we want to be at 15 while we're cruising because that kind of gives us the best, right? Now you go wide open throttle, that number changes. But if your PCM is built to read a wideband, chances are it actually will read it at speed because the wideband sensor can keep up with those speeds typically. Okay. Now, an aftermarket PCM is not set up to run a narrowband sensor. Some of them are set up to run a wideband sensor. They might have a built-in controller for it. They might not. Okay. So like the PCM that I use, an ECU Masters, it's actually up here in all this crap. So that's why I'm rocking the AEM. It has a built-in controller. I could wire the sensor up directly into the PCM and it would control it because it has a heater, it has an input, output into the sensor, right? But I have an aftermarket gauge, an AEM gauge that the PCM does not output to. So I actually, and it's its own controller, so I actually run my wideband into the gauge, and the gauge has an output, which I run into the PCM, and it uses a 0 to 5 volt signal to tell it what the ratio is. So that way I can data log with it. I'm not currently set up to actually run off that wideband. I will be when we get it back out on the track, so I can actually aim for adjusting my air fuel ratio, but I haven't been yet, right? This is a much superior system, okay? Because the PCM when I'm cruising down the road, the PCM can go, oh man, he's all the way up here at 10, right? We have to just dump fuel out of it. Like we got to get fuel way out of it, right? Or it can go, holy crap, this thing's about to burn itself to the ground. Pour the gas to it, right? And somewhere in between. Okay. So that is a superior system, but it is much more expensive. Okay. Much more expensive, right? So that's basically your inputs and your outputs as far as your stock PCM goes. And most all of this is used or reused in an aftermarket PCM. Okay. Now, here's where the limitations start to come in for factory PCMs and why you may or may not want to switch. Okay. Because there's good and bad with both of them, right? As with everything in life, there is no free lunch as per se. Okay. There is a third option as well, which we will talk about. Okay. Because what I have in front of me is a bona fide just factory PCM and a full aftermarket standalone ECU. Okay. The third option is sort of a blend of these. Technically, there's 4 options. You can get just a mail order tune for this. It is what it is. You can also get like the Hondas and such. You can get things like Hondata or Chrome. The GMs, you can get HP tuners, which is where they actually allow you to go in and change the maps inside of these PCMs. Okay. So you can go in and you can override what these are telling to do. You can change the numbers in those maps. Okay. And for a lot of you, that's a really good option. 1, you don't have to change your PCM. 2, you don't have to change your wiring harness, right? You don't have to have, there's a lot of stuff like that. Like it's way easier to do that sometimes, okay? But where the limitations can start to come in, and I'm going to speak on kind of how a Neon works, but it's very similar for other makes and models. I just don't have the firsthand knowledge to tell you, you don't want Hondata because the map size is X, aftermarket's blah, 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 okay? So you might have to do a little research on your own to figure out if the PCM you're thinking of using, your factory one, has these options or not, okay? So one negative with a Neon is the table that's your RPM table. So RPM is over here, okay? And then, all your other stuff over here. The issue is that the top limit is 8,160. Okay. You can technically turn that off. That's the highest you can set the factory rev limiter. Okay. You can technically turn this off. However, from 8,160 RPMs and down, every revolution of the motor gets 1 calculation. So it does the calculations on every single RPM to say where at in this map it should be. Okay. If I go above this, so if I delete this and say I'm trying to spin 8,400, okay, the issue is that up here, and this is what's known as resolution, okay, once you get above that, you're not doing 1 per revolution, you're doing it about every 5, okay, and in the scheme of things, that is still really fast, okay, because 8,400 revolutions per minute. I'm going to do some mathy maths. We're going to go 8,100. Okay. So 8,100 RPMs equals 135 times a second. Okay. Which is another thing to keep in mind is your engine is firing 135 times a second at 8,100 RPMs. Okay. So instead of doing 135 calculations, if you do it every 5 revolutions, it's only doing 27, okay? And that still sounds like a lot. 27 calculations a second sounds like a lot. However, things can change very quickly in an engine, okay? The resolution skip above there is where we want the resolution to not skip, because that's where the most damage can occur. Because if in those 5 revolutions, something changes and it decides to stop spraying fuel for 5 revolutions, things are going to go sideways quick, okay? Or if it's in the wrong portion of the map, you know, if I lift and it's still pouring a bunch of fuel in, or if I get back into gas and it's not putting fuel in, that's where the problems arise, okay? If I'm down here at idle, I actually wouldn't care if it was only doing 5 a second, because it's not going to change that much, right? But once you start getting up here, that is a major disadvantage, all right? There is a limit to every stock PCM when it comes to this, how large the map is, okay? Now, the other part of that is this might actually only be segmented, and this has more to do with the programming of it. I don't actually like fully understand it. I don't know the actual number for this. This is a theory I'm telling you about, okay? This map is actually like a 4 by 4. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4. Man, I can't draw my threes. Okay, and the idea is that, you know, you have these 4 by 4 blocks. Okay, and it's just not a lot of resolution as far as, you know, how nitty gritty it can go in. So like these are actually RPM gaps. So like this would actually be like 0 to, you know, we'll say 1500, okay? This one's going to be 1500 to, you know, 3000. This one's going to be 3000 to 5000. This one will be 5,000 to, you know, 8,100, right? The tighter your groups get. So like if we were to divide that and we were to just double the amount of squares that this had, now we have better resolution. We can tune it better because 5,000 RPM and 8,000 RPM need different fuel, right? And this is just a theory on ranges. Okay, I'd actually have to look up and see where I wasn't planning on getting this deep into it, right? However, this is one of the explanations of why it might be better or worse. Okay, so you might have like a 4 by 4 or a 6 by 6 map. All right, some of the newer aftermarket PCMs, I want to say have something like a 16 by 16 or even a 20 by 20 map. Okay, so if I'm trying to go to 8,000 RPMs and I have a 20 by 20 map, or if I'm trying to go to 8,000 RPMs and I have a 5 by 5 map, right? I can get much smaller squares in here to get better resolution versus having one big square, okay? If you have a header and you have a cold air intake, and that's it, a 16 by 16 map probably doesn't make any matter to you, okay? Because you can run on a fairly stock tune with the stock size. If you're trying to put down 250 wheel horse out of a Neon, which is pretty unheard of, or putting 330 horse out of a K series, which is done, but not by a lot, right? You need more resolution because your margin for error has gotten a lot smaller, okay? You don't want to be trying to have a giant chunk of RPM covered, the more compression you have and the higher RPM you're trying to turn, okay? Now, if this is important to you and you need that higher resolution, Honda or, HP tuners, they can't fundamentally change the block architecture, as far as I know. If I'm wrong, if somebody's watching this and they can tell me if I'm wrong about that, please fill me in. I am not that well versed on Honda or HP tuners, okay? But you can't, like, the Neon tuning suites out there, you cannot fundamentally change the block architecture of the map, okay? You can't change the block structure. But an aftermarket PCM, I can have a much larger block structure, okay? So a stock PCM or a tuned PCM isn't going to give me that, right? I also, on a Neon PCM, mine, all right, so a stock factory single overhead cam is set to 6,850, auto or stick. A dual overhead cam, automatic Neon, is set to 6,850. A factory dual cam stick shift PCM is set to 7,300 and I think 30 or so. Basically, 7,280. Sorry, it's been a fat minute since I've messed with these. Okay, so it's 7,280, I think. A Mopar PCM, which used to be pretty good, was set to 7,600 for a single or 7,800 for a dual. An AFX PCM or later a psyched PCM or a boost button was set to 8,100. Okay. So pretty big jump, right? Your boy put some together. Didn't mind spinning some RPMs. My rev limiter was a crispy 9,600. Okay. The highest I ever turned it on data log was 9,432. I did that down at the Freedom Factory. Yeah. That was with the small tires that I ran. I put the big tires on and I was turning 91, but that's the highest I ever saw. Okay. So, and I say that because if I was trying to go off this stock PCM architecture, I had 1,300 RPM that I'd have been skipping calculations and not doing well on. Okay. So for me, I switched years ago to an aftermarket PCM for this. Okay. This was a bonus, but I did it for this, right? I needed a higher rev limiter. I consistently would run 83, 84, 8,500 locally. I needed just a little bit of RPM at different racetracks. I'd go over 8,100 a lot, okay? So that was why I switched, right? Now, you can trick the PCMs by adding and you can trick them to subtract and add fuel pretty easily, to be honest, okay? For the most part, that is not too difficult to do. And with what we do, it isn't too terrible because all your computer knows is how long to open the fuel injector, okay? It's going to open it up for X amount of milliseconds, okay? So it has no idea if it has a 20-pound injector, a 40-pound injector, or a 100-pound injector. It just knows to open it for 10 milliseconds or 50 milliseconds, okay? So it isn't an issue to just put a little bigger fuel injector in and not open it quite as long to get the fueling that you need. So tuning for fueling and tuning for spark with a stock PCM at wide open throttle typically isn't too hard to do, okay? However, where an aftermarket or where that comes to a problem is that at idle, it is injecting at idle. A great big built motor still needs roughly the same fuel. Don't come at me too hard. Roughly, okay? The same fuel as a stock motor, because it doesn't take crap to idle a motor, okay? It really doesn't. But if I have a 20-pound injector factory and it's opening it for, say, 2 milliseconds, if I put a 40-pound injector in, it's going to inject twice as much fuel at the same millisecond. The PCM, it isn't going to try to pull fuel, especially if it doesn't have a O2 sensor, okay? And even then, it can't pull 100% fuel out because you've doubled it. 100% more of what it's supposed to be is double. So it can't pull 100%. It can only pull like 25%. So it is going to idle like shit. There's a chance it's going to start really poorly too, because it's injecting twice as much fuel as it should when it starts. So you could practically be flooding your motor out trying to start it because it's got that cold start enrichment. So it's throwing fuel at it, plus it's double whatever it thinks it is, right? And there are some tips and tricks you can go in and you can kind of fiddle with it a lot, but for the most part, if you put really big injectors in for wide open throttle performance, a factory-based PCM is going to have a really hard time controlling them, okay? Now, the beauty of an aftermarket PCM is that you can actually tell most of them how big the injector is, and it can kind of it has a little base calculation deal in there. It can actually control big aftermarket injectors better at idle because it knows that it needs way less fuel at idle because it knows the injectors are a little bit different sized, okay? So that's an advantage to an aftermarket PCM. I had my factory ECU tuned on my bone stock engine, didn't see any gains. Must be the tuner's fault. Some factory PCMs are tuned pretty well. Yeah, so we're going to cover this one in just a second. Jason asks, can I relocate the location of the ECU? My harness runs right over the right front tire in the fender. Once I was rolling over the right fender or right front so much, I ground down the wire, so then no more go. And what can a stock injector CC? It all depends the make and model, Chris. So a factory neon injector is 19 pounds. I don't know that CCs of them is for sure, right? So if you're running a bigger built motor and you need bigger injectors and you need higher RPM and you need finer control of the tables, okay, those are all really good reasons to go with an aftermarket PCM. Now you could run an AEM, you can run a Motec, you could run a Link ECU, you could run a Mega Squirt, you could run a Micro Squirt, you could run a Haltech. There's any numbers, an ECU Master, okay? I'm not here to tell you which one you should run, right? But something else to consider, that when you are going to be putting in an aftermarket PCM, you are going to have to make it fit your car. And you are going to have to make it read that list of inputs. So you are probably going to end up with something that looks like this. So if the devil's spaghetti terrifies you, it's going to cost you extra to pay somebody else to do it, okay? This is a flying lead harness for a Mega Squirt PCM, okay? This is the part that plugs into the PCM. This is the part that goes out to the motor or anything else you want to hook up to it. Now this one is actually labeled pretty nice. So here is the crankshaft. So if I actually come out here and look, this one is actually really neat because it has both wires. It has two wires, which is your signal and your ground, but it's actually shielded. Okay, that's actually really nice. The rest of these are labeled. Like here is the right? So here is the coolant temp sensor. And, so if you can actually take a flying lead harness like this one's from DIY Auto Tune, hashtag not sponsored. And this one, you can actually, they tell you what wire goes to what, right? So it cuts it down pretty easily. The flying lead harness I bought for my PCM didn't do that. And it only had about half the wires I need populated, okay? So just a quick, very quick lesson, okay? If this is your PCM, all right, you have your crank, your cam, your TPS, your coolant, cam, crank, TPS, coolant. Those are the main ones that I have. We'll do O2, okay? These 5 sensors are all going to share, depending on the type of sensors that you use, okay? So this is neon stuff. Yours might vary slightly. Your coolant sensor might only be a 2-wire, okay? Your O2 sensor, we're actually going to forget O2 sensor for this one, just to make it basic. But your crank sensor and your cam sensor and your TPS sensor and your coolant sensor, they are all going to share a 5-volt reference signal, okay? Your PCM is going to make that. So you have to make that 5-volt signal come out and split to all of these, okay? They are also going to share a sensor ground. So they're actually going to share a ground. So it's also going to make one of those. And you're going to have to share all of those, right? This flying lead harness does not have 4 5-volt reference signals, okay? The other thing is your injectors, your coil, they have a 12-volt signal that does not come from the PCM, okay? So they actually run a 12-volt signal up that goes to both of them, right? The PCM actually grounds them. So you come up here from both of them. Now, I show that from one, but you're going to have 4 injectors and you're going to have 2 to 4 coils. Because if you have a wasted spark setup, you still have 2 coil packs that you have to wire in, okay? If you have VTEC, right? If you have TPS. Oh no, I have TPS. So IAC, right? Trying to think of what's necessary to make the car run. Coolant, crank, cam. And to be fair, not all of them need a cam sensor. So if you're going to do sequential fuel injection, which is where cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4, they all get their own spray of fuel. That's called sequential injection. It goes in firing order. If you have that, you need a cam sync so that it knows top dead center of number 1, whether it is on compression or whether it is on exhaust, okay? If you do batch fire, which is what a lot of the mega squirt stuff does, you don't actually need the cam sensor. It just needs a crank sensor. It just needs to know where top dead center is. But what it does is it fires 2 of them at the same time. It's called batch fire. And basically, number 1 will have the intake valve open and it'll spray fuel in it. Number 3 will be on the power stroke. It's going to spray fuel, but it'll just sit by the valve, okay? So you don't technically need a cam sensor, but you might, right? So when you build a wiring harness, it's not as simple as run a wire here, run a wire there, run a wire here, run a wire there. Okay. This harness doesn't have the 12-volt stuff for the injectors or the coil pack, stuff like that. Okay. It also does not have the ground split for all of them. It does not have the 5-volt split for all of them. It does have the signal wire that comes back. Okay. So when you build a harness, this is a harness. I did not build this one. This is actually a fairly quality harness, right? But this is the one for this AEM system. This is the plug that goes into that computer. Okay. So you have a bunch of wires that stick off from here. All right. If you are the type of person that the thought of having to figure out what each one of these little bitty pins does and what it goes to, and actually sitting down and figuring out some sort of wiring harness, if that terrifies you, you are going to have to buy a harness to be able to run an aftermarket PCM. If you run a Honda, they are out there. You know, even the Neons, you know, you can buy them. You're going to pay a lot extra for it, right? Me, because I like doing my own stuff, right? I buy one of these, and then not these ones because these are actually pre-populated, but these are the plugs. So on a Dodge Neon, these actually fit the crank, the cam, the coil, right? This singular plug fits all of those things. Okay. Fuel injectors are really easy. There's only 2 styles. You have the EV1 or EV6. Those are really easy to purchase from any number of places so that you can wire those. Okay. Coolant temp sensor is the same way. I use a GM sensor. It's super easy to find those plugs. Go from there. If you have a Honda, there are any number of companies that you can buy all the plugs and connectors that you need, the pins, connectors, and everything. So it isn't too difficult to build your own harness using all fresh stuff. Okay. I'm going to give you a tip and trick if you do decide to do this on your own. Okay. Buy extras of everything. All right. For a Neon, because everything uses these, right? I have a ton of spares, but that's because we bought them in bulk because I did more than one harness, right? But if I'm buying these and I know I need 3 for my harness, I'm probably going to buy 5 or 6 because it's not going to cost me any more shipping because they're light, but it will allow me to depin one if I ever break the connector and just slide a new connector on. Okay. I'm also going to buy extra pins because they're not that expensive, 10, 15, 20 cents a piece. But if I screw one up in the process of building a harness, I have extra. If something ever happens to the wiring, I have extra, and I don't have to worry about buying them later. Okay. So buy extra if you need them, or if you don't have them. That way you've got them. They're just there. Okay. But that is a negative to an aftermarket PCM for most people. Okay. On a Neon, it's a negative in that you have to pay for it, you have to redo it. But the thing is the newest first generation Neon is a 1999. So the newest Dodge Neon is 25 years old, 26 years old at this point. Okay. That is a long time for wiring harnesses. So chances are your wiring harness needs repaired or redone anyways, right? So if I have to do that, if I have a bad wiring harness, I might as well go this route, aftermarket PCM, right? But if you are terrified of wiring, you know, if you're one of those guys that tells, I hear it all the time from people like, I can't, it's just too confusing. I don't want to do it. Like if you screw something up, it's just bad, blah, blah, blah. I get that. You know, some people, it terrifies them. If that's you, you're going to have to pay somebody to do it. Okay. Now, the other issue is that depending on the aftermarket PCM you go to, I had the distinction of saying that I did something really, really cool. There was a point in time where I was the only person on the planet running a first generation 2-liter Dodge Neon motor on an ECU master PCM. And that's really cool to be able to say, because I took the PCM, not this one, obviously. I took the PCM, I took a wiring harness, I put it on the car, I wired it all up, and I made it run. I got some help from Tyler to figure it out a little bit. Okay. And we made it run. But I kept having some issues. The thing wouldn't start, kept backfiring on me. I couldn't get it to start for a little while. I reached out to some people, got some help on the settings of like, hey, try this, right? And I did, and it would work, sorta. But then I ran into a real head scratcher of an issue, and I couldn't figure it out. I kept having this weird problem. And the problem with being the only person in the world is that I had absolutely nobody that I could talk to about my specific setup. Nobody. However, if I'd put a Mega Squirt on it, there are forums dedicated to Mega Squirts on Dodge Neons. Okay. If you run a stock crank sensor, the settings are already in the Mega Squirt. You just have to click the right settings, bada boom, bada bing. There are people who have base maps already built, right? It was all you can be set up and run. I wanted to be a little different. I believed what they told me at PRI about how easy it would do and how it would absolutely run it. So I bought one. Okay. Yeah. Now, if I had to do it all over again, would I go ECU Masters? No, I would not. If I could figure out the starting issue with it, I might be able to recommend it, but it still is doing some quirky stuff that I don't like, you know. But there are other PCMs out there that I think could adapt to the input output a little bit better, but we're gonna find out because it's what I got. I got two of them so both cars can run on one. I got the harnesses already built. I got a whole new flying lead harness to make a whole new harness too. Like we're set. We got all the stuff, so that's what we're gonna do, right? But if you are trying to do something goofy like that, and you're the only person out there, there's only a few people. There's not a lot of help. But say you're running, a Honda on a K series, that's everywhere. If you're running HP tuners on an Ecotech, that's everywhere. You can likely get some help. Okay. Positives and negatives. The other positive to stay in stock PCM is that it is cheap. You already own it. A Mega Squirt, a Micro Squirt, the new Micro Squirt is $400. Okay. I believe that's what it was that I looked it up. I just looked this up, I think last night. Just a second. So the new amped Micro Squirt ECU, which does include a flying lead harness. Okay, so the ECU with flying harness and leads. It's basically $400. PCM alone is $340. It's $70 for the flying lead harness. Okay. And then you can add other options like other sensors and all blah, blah, blah. But that is the PCM and the flying lead harness for $400, right? That does not include. Now, what you can do if you do have a good stock harness, you can take that flying lead harness, cut your stock PCM plug off. You can take that harness and you can just, you can do it a little bit like this. It'll look a little bit like this, which is where you're just basically butt connecting all this stuff together, or solder shrink, however you feel like doing it, but you're splicing this all together at the connector. Okay. You can do that. It's absolutely doable, right? So you don't technically have to build out the whole harness, but you do have to connect them. Okay. So you're $400 for that PCM without building the wiring harness. Okay. So you can easily be $400, $500, $600, $700, $800 in PCM and wiring harness. And then the other thing with aftermarket PCMs, and you should be doing this if you're tuning your PCM too, is you need a dyno tune. Okay. You can possibly get away with having someone remote tune or kind of street tune or mail you a tune, stuff like that. Okay. You can do that. However, putting it on a dyno, having somebody tippity tap, tap, tap on the keyboard is going to be the best recipe for success. most tuners are not going to open their laptop on your car for less than $400. Okay, most of them won't. So if you switch from a factory PCM to an aftermarket ECU, wired up, installed by yourself, and then put it on a dyno, you could easily be $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 easily. Now, it is likely the best way to extract maximum horsepower out of your setup with the best resolution and the highest rev limiter, stuff like that. Okay. Now, a lot of aftermarket ECMs also have some other advantages. My 95 PCM is not set up to be able to run flex fuel whatsoever. Okay. It is not set up for boost in any way. It is not set up for a two-step in any way. It is not set up for ECM protections, okay, or motor protections. And what I mean by that is, so this harness has one in it. See if I can find it. This harness has a pressure sensor built into it, okay? My ECU masters have tables in them that if my oil pressure drops below X PSI above Y RPM, it will shut it down. It can be set up that my wideband, if it goes full lean above X RPMs, it will shut it down, okay? If my coolant temp sensor exceeds X temp, it will shut it down. That is not built into most factory PCMs. They don't have that capability, okay? Which can be a good and bad thing, because if I have an oil pressure sensor suddenly go goofy on me, could cost me a race. Could save me a motor, could cost me a race, right? I can add a fuel pressure sensor. And if my fuel pressure drops below X PSI, it'll shut it down. So I'm not going to run lean because I ran out of fuel, okay? The better like that micro squirt does not have all of those capabilities at the same time because it doesn't have that many inputs. My ECU master, I don't think I can do all of those, but a lot of the other aftermarket PCMs, they'll be set up for like a V8. So you can actually switch, instead of running 8 injector outputs, I can run 4 injector outputs and change the other 4 to something else. Okay. Some PCMs you can do that with, not all of them. So there are some very distinct advantages to switching to an aftermarket PCM. You can have those built-in protections. You can have a higher rev limiter. And in the case of a Neon, there was one guy who was able to crack the first gen. There's actually two. The 95s, which are these single plugs, Boost Button, Rob Lloyd with Boost Button. I actually helped develop them for a little bit. He's local here in Michigan. He built a little tuner deal. You can plug into these and tune them, but you have to use 2 separate programs. They haven't been messed with in a long time. It's difficult to do. Not all of them flash, right? But the 96 through 99 PCMs, there was one guy who cracked them. He made a software suite, and then he was promptly fucking sued by HP tuners, and they took him to the cleaners, and he's never allowed to sell, service, or do anything with that software out there. So there's 1 or 2 guys out there who are still messing with them that can make it happen. However, it's harder to get. The average Joe can't just plug into it, retune it, anything like that, okay? A Mega Squirt, the only thing you need to tune a Mega Squirt is a laptop. And actually, I have a little 10-inch netbook that I can use that works really well for it. You don't need some big fancy thing. You can run Mega Squirt right off it, okay? I can go in my ECU master. I bought a data logger, an external data logger that goes on it that has an SD card in it. So I can plug that in, and when the PCM turns on, it just starts data logging. I get done racing. I can take that SD card out. I can put it in my laptop, and I can physically see everything that the PCM inputted or outputted. Okay, which honestly I don't do that often because I don't change the tune. You can believe me or not. Once I get it tuned, I take it up to Tyler up at Force. We get it tuned. Man, I don't mess with it. The only thing I mess with is trying to get it to start and I might play around with like the accel enrichment, like a few things like that, where it's like I'm trying to fine tune the minutia. Man, I don't mess with the fuel maps. I don't mess with the spark maps. Like we did them on the dyno, they work good, right? I never have issues with them. But if I'm out racing and I stand on the gas and it kind of hit it, you know, like what the heck? I can go back and look at that data log and it'll tell me, hey, right here you can see you lost cam sync for a second, or you lost crank signal for a second, or you had a voltage spike, or you know, my O2 sensor was not tied into the tune, but it was tied into the data logger, so I could look at it and see when I stood on the gas here, it went super lean for a second and then came back. Huh? Okay, cool. So you know, maybe I had a drop in fuel pressure, right? I don't have a fuel pressure gauge on it now. I will. I don't have one. I didn't have one, right? So like I couldn't look and see what the fuel pressure was. But if I see no other evidence of a reason why I would be lean suddenly, I would check. Oh crap, man! I ran low on fuel there. I just took it away from there. That's why. Okay. So a lot of aftermarket PCMs have a capability for data logging, right? External data logging. So you don't have to have you know, like some of them, like Mega Squirt. Like my dad runs on a micro squirt. For my dad to data log, he would have to carry the laptop in his race car. Okay. Some aftermarket PCMs you do, and you don't have to do that. Okay. Do you do traction control, or have you been around it? I do not do traction control. I've been accused of it, which is hilarious. Traction control, there are two basic ways traction control works. The ECU master ECU is only capable of one strategy. It is not capable of the other, okay? We're going to talk about this real quick for a second, because there are some PCMs out there that can, like almost all of them can do traction control of some sort, almost all aftermarket ECUs. The issue is that almost all of them require a set of sensors that none of us racers are installing, or it would be very, very easy to tell that we did, okay? Traction control has basically two methods. The first one you got four tires, you got an engine. The first traction control strategy requires a wheel speed sensor on all four wheels. And what it does is it reads all four of those. And for us, we're front wheel drive, okay? If it reads that this wheel speed is suddenly, we're going to use round numbers. Let's say it's at 500 and these are all at 300, okay? It knows I'm spinning the tire. So it's going to pull power out, okay, to try to stop it from doing that, right? Now, some vehicles, so like Davis Technology, their newer setup there that the drag race guys use, you know, we're going to say that this is rear wheel drive, okay, differential transmission, right? They actually measure drive shaft speed, but they measure it and they use the second strategy, okay? So the first strategy, though, continues to have wheel speed sensors and to be able to read the speed of those wheel speed sensors, okay? If you don't have wheel speed sensors and you don't have a tone wheel on the tire on the wheels, so if you don't have that sensor reading those, you cannot use that traction control strategy, okay? You can't, because it can't, if it can't read these, it can't pull any timing out because it doesn't know that the speed's not right, all right? The ECU master, their traction control strategy requires the use of wheel speed sensors, okay? Now, the second type of traction control strategy, this is what Davis Technology made his money on. This is the little quarter-size deal that goes on an MSD box that the rear-wheel drive guys like to use, okay? It is based off from a table, and it is time versus acceleration. And basically, you tell it, like you have to work with it, you have to figure out, when I stand on the gas in the gear ratio that I'm in, so like the V8, like the stock car versions of these, right? They actually only have engine speed. They don't require wheel speed, or they don't require any calculations. They don't care what gear it's in. But what the way they work is that when I stand on the gas, if I'm at 1,000 RPMs and I want to go to 8,000 under load in the gear ratio that I am, that should take, we're going to say here to here, should take 1.5 seconds. Okay. So my acceleration rate would be, I'm just going to make up a number here. I've never actually done this. I've never actually messed with this shit. So I don't know what an actual good acceleration rate is. So we're going to make up numbers. Okay. So let's say that my acceleration rate is going to be 1,000 RPM per 10 milliseconds, okay? Or microseconds or megaseconds, but 10 per 1,000 RPMs, okay? So my traction control, or my acceleration versus time should look like this, okay? It knows, like the Davis technology, it knows that I am spinning the tires if my RPM goes anywhere in this range, okay? So what it's going to do is if say I'm right here and I jump up here into this acceleration zone, okay, it is going to start pulling timing out slowly, like 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, okay? It's going to start pulling it out a little bit, right? Until I get back on that curve, okay? The ECU masters I use does not contain the capability to do this, all right? It's just not out there, right? I cannot say that about other PCMs, all right? I honestly have no idea if any other PCMs have that capability. I don't care. I don't spin the tires. So where this is going to be helpful would be dirt, because most pavement guys and gals, if we're spinning the tires, it is a setup problem. It's a traction problem in that, you know, where we're trying to run really little bitty tires. And the solution to that is not as much throttle or not as much horsepower. Okay. On pavement, traction control for us isn't quite as useful. On dirt, if I could mash the gas and I've got 300 horsepower and I go in a corner and I just slam it in there and I stand all over the gas, and I could get my motor, you know, instead of having my horsepower curve go like this, if my horsepower curve kind of went like this, where I'm no traction, no traction, no traction, you know, so it's constantly trying to fight to give me the most horsepower to keep the tires under me. I'm going to rock it off the corner versus the guy next to me who's just spinning both of them and sliding, okay? So it absolutely could be a very useful tool on dirt. Now, I have never been to a dirt race and heard a front-wheel drive guy and went, but he's using traction control, okay? Because it makes a very distinct sound. When you start yanking timing under full throttle, it makes a very distinct sound in our cars, okay? And I mean that by 4-cylinders and or V8s. I have heard some V8 guys who, oh yeah, it's got a weird random misfire. It is weird that the misfire translated to your rear end kind of burping a little bit. Like every time it would go hurt, 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 huh? Now, the times I've heard it was a runway you run race and it was perfectly legal. They could have used it, but I've heard it, right? I've never heard a front wheel drive 4-cylinder come out of the corner and just okay. I take it back. I've heard some do it, but it's very obvious that it isn't traction control. They just ain't running right. Okay. So, right. But traction control exists. Now, one other thing I will talk about is there was a tuner out there who had a traction control knob. I think that's what they called it. And basically, it had 5 settings. It did not use this strategy. It did not use this strategy. What it did is that its dyno curve for those PCMs is you had a dyno curve that went like that, a dyno curve that went like that, went like that, and went like that. And that knob would change the map from, again, we're going back to, you know, your timing and fuel being in here, okay? This, round numbers, this was 20 degrees of timing, this was 25 degrees, this was 30, and this was 36, okay? So it wasn't that it was a traction control strategy, it was that it was just pulling timing across the board and would give you less horsepower. And so, and I believe you could change it on the fly. So if you went out there full boogie and it was just spinning the tires, you could drop it a notch and you'd have less horsepower. It would bite and you would go. Okay. That's my understanding of how that works. Could be wrong. Never actually talked to the tuner guy about it. So just the way they talked about it and that was what I picked up how it worked. So it wasn't actually a true traction control strategy. It was just more less base timing to start with. So, yeah. Should you switch? Maybe. I don't know. I can't tell you. Okay. I can't say, yes, you absolutely should. No, you absolutely should not. Okay. I can't tell you that because I don't know your pros, your cons, your budget. Okay. If you need more RPM, you need better control of the fuel, better control of the spark, you have the money, and you either have the money to pay somebody to do the wiring or you're not afraid to do the wiring yourself, you should switch. If you have a fairly stock motor and you don't have the money to buy a PCM and you don't have the money to do the wiring and you don't have the desire to do the wiring, a mail order tune probably be perfect for you. Okay, you don't need to switch. If you just need a little bit of tuning capability, you know, you got a little bit done to the motor, but you don't need anything wild. A setup sort of like Honda or HP tuners would probably be the way to go for you. Okay. If you have any questions, that's kind of everything that I thought to tell you guys and gals about. If you have any questions, please post them in there. If I missed anything, if I was wrong about anything, if you're watching this later and you were just like, oh my God, Todd, you're so stupid, feel free to throw that in the comments too. Okay. I'm going to stay on here for a minute or so, absolutely, so that I can answer any questions that pop up. But that's kind of what I got for you guys and gals tonight. I personally run an aftermarket ECU and I love it. I love having an aftermarket ECU. I'm going to continue to run one. If the rules change and don't allow me to, I will run somewhere else that does. I have never hidden that I'm running an aftermarket ECU. I know some guys who are running a Mega Squirt inside of a stock PCM. It happens, right? But if you ever see one of my cars plugged into a factory PCM, like Doc is right now, it just has a Mopar PCM or a boost button PCM in it, and that's it. If you see one of my cars that doesn't have one of those, there you go. Oh, you know what I did not actually answer was James's question earlier. I think it was James. Was it James or Jason? Jason. He asked over on YouTube, can he relocate your ECU? Yes. So that is something that I did not cover that I should have. Okay. Your PCM does not, technically it could, if you want to get to the very, 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 very most at most, yes. But your PCM does not care if it has that much wiring or this much wiring. Okay. If you want to relocate your PCM, especially if you have a long, you know, if your wiring harness looks like this from the factory, absolutely. It does not matter where on the car your PCM is, okay? Electricity travels fast enough that it shouldn't be an issue to have an extra 2, 3, 4 feet of wiring, okay? The very nitty gritty, like if I was running an Indy car trying to spin 20,000 RPMs, then yeah, the delay in signal from the PCM to the engine might matter. what we're doing, it doesn't matter having an extra 2 feet, 3 feet of wiring to relocate the PCM. My PCMs are over on the floor on the passenger side. They won't be in the newest car just because I'm not putting anything on the right side that I don't have to, right? But if you wanted to take and move your PCM with a factory wiring harness, it's not technically that hard to do if you don't mind wiring. All you have to do is chop it, extend it out, and reconnect everything, okay? What I do suggest you do, if you're not that good with wiring, okay? These are your wires here. Don't just cut them all and extend them out. Take this one, cut it, because you know where you know how much length you want to add, okay? Cut it, connect one wire to the wire you're using, connect the other side so it's continuous. Grab the next one, cut it, insert that wire. Cut the next one, go down the line. That way you know beyond any shadow of a doubt that everything is hooked up where it should be properly end to end. You don't have to worry about, because chances are you're not going to have the same color wire that you're extending them with, okay? I definitely recommend having at least the same size wire, if not a little bit bigger. Don't ever go smaller, okay? But, and you can, look, this is a factory harness. This is a factory body harness that I've got that I keep pulling up here. This is a factory harness that goes under the dash in a neon. And this is all random stuff that you don't need. So like, actually, I guess this is part of a, no, those are extra wires. But this is part of the body harness. So I could take and cut like this chunk of wire out and reuse this one as factory wire. Okay. If your wire is good enough, you could do that. If your wire, it's 25, 30 years old, you may or may not want to do that, but you could. Okay. So you can reuse that factory harness that you've taken out and plug it in. But I do not recommend just and then try to reconnect. Now, if you are really good with wiring, you could do that. Okay. But if you're not, okay. Now, for the love of all things holy, do not use Scotch locks on your engine harness. Don't use them for anything that you want to actually work well. Okay. Also, if you're going to just use butt connectors, that's fine. Okay. Buy the good ones, the heat shrinkable ones, or butt connect them, put some heat shrink over them, seal them back up. Once you cut that wire, you are inviting problems into the harness. So make sure you crimp it properly and make sure that you cover it properly. Now, we are going to do, at some point, we're going to film a video or we'll do a live, and I'll actually go through and show you how to cut, connect, crimp, split, splice, solder wires, what you should or shouldn't do, stuff like that. We'll talk about that later. We'll do another show before long, but just for the love of all things, don't half-ass it. You'll cause yourself more problems than it's worth, okay? Have I done any testing with shock sensors? No, because my ECU doesn't have enough inputs to do that, and also I've never had enough money to buy some to mess with. It's something I've always wanted to do. I'm not ruling out doing it in the future. However, I haven't yet. So, yeah. I think it has gotten colder outside because it's gotten colder over here. But that's what I got for you tonight, guys and gals. I really, really do appreciate you all being here. I don't know what's been up the last few nights. I don't think Facebook is showing as many of you that I'm live. So I don't know. We might have figured that out. But I do appreciate all of you that are here. If you haven't already, hit the like button for me. But yeah, we're going to be live tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow. It is being Sunday, and I am taking the day, and I am packing and getting ready for PRI. That is my entire goal tomorrow. That way I am ready early. I never have been. and I have a bet going with some of the people that I'm going with that I won't be ready. So I'm taking tomorrow, and I'm packing for PRI. So I'm taking my gear, like the camera gear I want, all my clothes, all that stuff. I'm getting ready early. So I don't know. Maybe tomorrow we'll do a "Why Should You Care About PRI" show instead of doing it a little bit later. So I tell you what, that's what we're gonna do tomorrow. We're gonna do a "Why Should You Care About PRI" show. That'll be tomorrow. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate you all. Yeah, thanks for being here for the month of December, where we go live every day, and we'll be live tomorrow.